Get your hands off the nozzle and step away from the vehicle, now!
Excuse me? I'm pumping gas. Tell me what crime you think you're stopping.
Suspicious activity! Clerk called! You've been casing this place!
You're not digging in my
now!
pockets while you're twitching on your gun.
Oh my God.
Get your hands off the nozzle and step away from the vehicle. Now. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't drop the nozzle, and he certainly didn't step away. He simply turned his head. His eyes narrowed against the glare of the midday sun and looked at the young man shouting at him. "Excuse me," Thorne asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that had silenced cartel lieutenants and federal prosecutors alike. "I said step away from the vehicle." Officer Kyle Vance had his hand resting ominously on his holster, his fingers twitching near the grip of his service weapon. He was 24 years old, with a haircut that was too tight on the sides and a uniform that looked like it had been tailored to emphasize biceps that weren't quite there yet. He stood with his legs spread wide, chin jutted out, projecting the kind of unearned authority that usually signaled deep insecurity. Thorne sighed, the sound of a man who had seen too much of the world to be impressed by a rookie with a badge. "I'm pumping gas, officer. I paid for it. I'm filling my tank. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem is you're acting suspicious," Vance snapped, closing the distance between them. "We got a call. Clerk says you've been standing here for 10 minutes staring at the building, loitering, casing the joint. Let's see some ID." It was 1:15 p.m. on a scorching Tuesday in July. The heat rose in shimmering waves off the asphalt of the Shell station on the outskirts of Atlanta. Thorne was wearing a navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki slacks, sunglasses perched on his nose, and leather loafers. He looked like exactly what he was, a senior government official on his way to a meeting. But Kyle Vance didn't see a 53-year-old grandfather and taxpayer. He saw a large black man in a nice SUV who didn't look like he belonged in this particular zip code. "I haven't been here 10 minutes, Thorne said calmly, turning back to check the pump display. "I've been here maybe 4. It's a 25-gallon tank. It takes time. As for casing the joint, I was checking my emails on my phone while the pump ran. Now, unless you have probable cause to believe I've committed a crime, I'm going to finish pumping my gas and go to work." Vance's face flushed a deep, angry red. He wasn't used to people talking back. In the 6 months he'd been patrolling Sector 4, he'd learned that intimidation usually worked. Most people got nervous. They stammered. They apologized. They handed over their licenses with shaking hands. But this man was standing there like he owned the pavement beneath his feet. "I determine what's probable cause," Vance barked, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "And right now my cause is that you're refusing a lawful order. You want to go to jail for obstruction. Is that how you want to spend your afternoon?" Thorne finally replaced the nozzle, the metal clink loud in the heavy silence that had fallen over the gas station. Other customers had stopped what they were doing. A woman at pump 4 froze with her gas cap in hand. A man in a delivery truck rolled down his window. Thorne turned fully to face the officer, crossing his arms over his chest. He stood 6'2" with broad shoulders and a posture that was ramrod straight. Son Thorne said the word heavy with warning. "You are making a mistake. I am not obstructing anything. I am a citizen conducting lawful business. If your clerk inside is nervous, that is an issue for them. But you need to lower your voice and check your tone before you do something that's going to cost you more than just your pride." It was the wrong thing to say to Kyle Vance. To Vance, respect was a one-way street paved with compliance and fear. He didn't hear the wisdom in the older man's voice. He only heard defiance. And in Kyle Vance's world, defiance was a nail that needed to be hammered down hard. Marcus Thorne was not a man who engaged in roadside debates, and he certainly wasn't a criminal. He was the assistant special agent in charge of the Atlanta Field Division of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He had 28 years of federal service under his belt. He had started his career in the violent streets of Miami in the late 90s, working undercover in operations that would make Officer Vance wet his expertly creased trousers. Thorne had dismantled money laundering rings in Chicago, taken down cartel cells in El Paso, and coordinated multi-agency task forces that seized tons of narcotics. He carried a Glock 19 on his hip, concealed beneath his shirt, and a badge in his back pocket that gave him authority across all 50 states and U.S. territories. He had survived shootouts, federal grand juries, and political maneuvering in Washington, D.C. He was a man who understood power. Real power, not the cheap imitation that came from a uniform and a loud voice. Officer Kyle Vance, on the other hand, was a legacy hire. His uncle was a captain in a neighboring precinct, and his father had been a sergeant before retiring on disability. Vance had scraped through the academy with minimum passing scores in de-escalation and constitutional law, but he had excelled at the shooting range and physical tactics. In his short time on the force, he had already garnered a reputation among the veteran officers. They called him a cowboy, and not as a compliment. His training officer had written 3 separate reports citing Vance for aggressive demeanor and poor judgment with minority contacts. But in a department that was understaffed and struggling to keep boots on the ground, those reports had been filed away in a drawer ignored by a chain of command that just wanted bodies in patrol cars. The heat of the day was oppressive, the kind of humidity that sticks your shirt to your back and makes tempers flare. The gas station was located in a transitional neighborhood, the kind of place where new condos were going up next to old strip malls, where the demographics were shifting and tensions were simmering. The clerk who had called 911 was new, a nervous young man who had seen a black man standing by a luxury SUV and decided he looked out of place. When the call came in, "Suspicious person, possibly casing the store, loitering at the pumps." Vance had taken it. He was bored. He was looking for action. He had driven into the lot with his lights off, hoping to catch someone in the act. When he saw Thorne, he didn't run the plates on the black Tahoe. If he had, he would have seen that the vehicle was registered to the U.S. Government Department of Justice. But Vance didn't believe in checking first. He believed in instinct, and his instinct told him that this man was a problem. Thorne watched the officer's eyes. He knew the look. He had seen it on the faces of low-level enforcers and corrupt local cops in 3 different decades. It was the look of a man who has decided on a narrative and will do anything to make reality fit that story. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Vance said, his hand now unbuttoning the retention strap on his holster. "ID. Now." Thorne didn't move his hands toward his pockets. He knew better. He knew that for a man like Vance, a sudden movement toward a pocket was all the justification he would need to draw his weapon. Thorne kept his hands visible, palms open, resting near his waist. Officer Thorne said, his voice steady, devoid of fear. "I am going to tell you something very important. I am a federal agent. My credentials are in my back pocket. My badge is next to them. I am armed, as is my right and duty. If you reach for that radio and call your supervisor, we can resolve this. If you continue down this path, you are going to end your career right here at pump number 6. Vance laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "A federal agent, right. And I'm the police commissioner. You think I haven't heard that one before I can buy a badge online for $15? You think a suit and a shiny truck makes you a fed? Check the plates," Thorne said. "Look at the tag. It's a government vehicle." Vance didn't look at the tag. He didn't look at the Department of Justice sticker in the windshield. He was too focused on the man in front of him, too focused on winning. "I don't need to check anything. I'm detaining you for investigation of impersonating a police officer. Turn around and put your hands on the car." The air at the gas station seemed to vibrate with tension. The woman at pump 4 had her phone out now, filming. The delivery driver had stepped out of his truck. Thorne saw the phones. He saw the witnesses. He knew that whatever happened next would be preserved forever. He had a choice. He could physically resist, which he was more than capable of doing, or he could comply and let the system destroy this young man. Thorne chose the law. He always chose the law. I am giving you a direct order to verify my credentials. Thorne said, his voice rising just enough to be heard by the recording phones. I am Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Marcus Thorne, Drug Enforcement Administration. You are violating federal law by interfering with a federal agent in the performance of his duties. Call your sergeant. I am the law here, Vance shouted, stepping forward and grabbing Thorne's left wrist. Turn around. It happened fast, but to Thorne it felt like slow motion. Vance didn't wait for compliance. He yanked Thorne's arm, twisting it behind his back with a leverage technique he'd learned in the academy. Thorne didn't fight back, but he didn't make it easy either. He simply let his body go rigid, a solid wall of muscle that Vance had to struggle against. Stop resisting. Vance screamed for the benefit of the cameras, despite the fact that Thorne was standing perfectly still. Vance slammed Thorne's chest against the hot metal of the Tahoe. The sound of the impact was a dull thud that made the woman recording gasp. I am not resisting, Thorne stated clearly, his face pressed against the window of his own government vehicle. I am complying. You are using excessive force on a compliant federal officer. Vance ignored him. He fumbled for his handcuffs, his breathing ragged with adrenaline and rage. He kicked Thorne's ankles apart harder than necessary. Spread 'em. You're done. You are done. He slapped the cuffs on Thorne's wrists, ratcheting them too tight. The metal bit into the skin, pinching the nerves. Thorne winced, but didn't cry out. He had been shot in the leg during a raid in 2004. Tight handcuffs were an annoyance, not a tragedy. But the disrespect, the sheer unadulterated ignorance of it burned hotter than the Georgia sun. You have the right to remain silent, Vance recited, grabbing Thorne by the back of his polo shirt and hauling him away from the SUV. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You better read the rest of it, Thorne said calmly as he was marched toward the patrol car. Because you're going to need a lawyer yourself, son. Shut up, Vance shoved Thorne toward the back seat of the cruiser. He opened the door and pushed Thorne's head down, forcing him into the cramped, hard plastic seat. The smell of stale sweat and disinfectant filled Thorne's nose. It was a smell he knew well from the other side of the cage. He had put hundreds of men in seats just like this. He never imagined he would be sitting in one himself, arrested by a boy who hadn't even been born when Thorne was making his first undercover buy. Vance slammed the door shut, sealing Thorne inside. The officer walked around to the driver's seat, strutting a little, adjusting his belt. He looked at the crowd of people watching him. Show's over, he yelled at them. Back off, or you're next. He didn't notice that Thorne's SUV was still unlocked. He didn't notice the pump was still running, though the automatic shutoff had clicked. He left a $50,000 government vehicle unsecured in a public lot with sensitive case files in a briefcase on the passenger seat. That alone was a fireable offense. But Vance wasn't thinking about procedure. He was thinking about the story he would tell back at the locker room. He had taken down a big guy. He had shown who was boss. Inside the car, the air conditioning was blasting, but it did little to cool the fury building in Marcus Thorne's chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He needed to remember every detail, every word spoken, every procedure missed. He began to build the file in his head. Failure to identify reason for stop. Failure to verify credentials. Excessive use of force. Unlawful arrest. Failure to secure suspect's vehicle. The list was long, and it was going to be expensive. Officer Vance climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door. He caught Thorne's eyes in the rearview mirror. Vance was grinning a tight, triumphant smirk. You know, Vance said as he threw the car into gear, peeling out of the gas station lot, you guys are all the same. Always got a story, always someone important. I'm a Fed. I know the mayor. It's pathetic. Thorne stared at the back of the officer's head. He spoke softly, his voice calm and terrifyingly even. Officer Vance, I saw your name tag. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember exactly how you feel right now. Because in about 20 minutes you are going to wish you had never stepped out of this car." Yeah, Vance dismissed him, turning onto the main road. "Save it for the judge. You're going downtown. Obstructing, resisting, impersonating an officer. I might even tack on disorderly conduct just for the attitude." The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Vance spent the entire time lecturing Thorne on respect and how people in this neighborhood needed to learn their place. He talked about how he could smell a criminal a mile away. He talked about how he was cleaning up the streets. Thorne didn't say another word. He just watched the scenery pass by, counting the seconds. He thought about his meeting at the task force headquarters. He would be late. His special agent in charge, a no-nonsense woman named Elena Rostova, would be wondering where he was. When she found out, God help the Seattle Police Department. They pulled into the precinct Sallyport. The heavy metal doors rolled down behind them, shutting out the sunlight. Vance killed the engine. "End of the line, tough guy," Vance said. He got out and opened the back door, grabbing Thorne by the arm again. He hauled him out, marching him toward the booking area. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the smell of coffee and anxiety hung in the air. Vance walked Thorne through the secure doors, parading him past the holding cells. At the booking desk sat Lieutenant Frank Miller. Miller was 55, a 30-year veteran who had started walking the beat when policemen still carried revolvers. He had tired eyes and a mustache that had gone gray a decade ago. He was reading a file, sipping lukewarm coffee, when he heard the commotion. "What do you have?" Vance Miller asked without looking up. "Good hook," Lieutenant Vance said, beaming. "Suspicious person at the Shell station on 4th. Refused to ID, claimed he was a Fed, resisted arrest, got him for impersonation, obstruction, and resisting." Miller looked up. He saw Kyle Vance flushed and proud, then he looked at the man in handcuffs. Miller froze. He looked at the bespoke loafers. He looked at the quality of the polo shirt. He looked at the face. Miller had been around a long time. He knew a criminal face and he knew a cop face. The man standing in front of him had the eyes of a man who gave orders, not one who took them. "Impersonation," Miller asked slowly, putting down his coffee. "Yeah," Vance scoffed. "Said he was DEA. Told him to tell it to the Marines." Miller stood up. He walked around the desk. He looked Marcus Thorne in the eye. Sir Miller said, his voice cautious, "Do you have identification?" "Back pocket," Thorne said. "Next to my badge, my real badge, the one your officer said I bought online." Miller reached into Thorne's back pocket. He pulled out a black leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. U.S. Department of Justice, Drug Enforcement Administration. Below it was the photo ID card with the holographic seal. Marcus Thorne, Assistant Special Agent in Charge. Miller stared at the badge. He stared at the ID. He felt a cold pit open in his stomach. He looked at the date of issue. He looked at the rank. This wasn't just an agent. This was a boss. This was a man who had the Attorney General's direct line. Miller slowly closed the wallet. He turned to Officer Vance. The room went dead silent. The other officers who had been watching paused. Vance Miller said, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with suppressed rage. "Yeah, Lou Fake right." Vance was still smiling, oblivious. "Give me your keys," Miller said. "My keys? For the cuffs?" Vance asked, confused. "Unlock him," Miller roared, the sound echoing off the cinder block walls. "Unlock him right now." Vance jumped. "But Lieutenant, he is the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the DEA." "You absolute moron!" Miller screamed. "You just arrested a high-ranking federal official for pumping gas." The color drained from Kyle Vance's face. It didn't happen gradually. It happened all at once, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He looked at the wallet in Miller's hand. He looked at Thorne, who was watching him with that same steady, impassive gaze. I didn't know, Vance stammered. He wouldn't show me. Unlock him. Miller pointed at the cuffs. Vance fumbled with his keys. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped them twice. He finally managed to get the key in the slot. The mechanism clicked. The cuffs swung open. Thorne brought his hands around to the front. He rubbed his wrists, looking at the deep red indentations left by the metal. He took his wallet from Miller's hand and slid it back into his pocket. "Lieutenant Miller, is it?" Thorne asked, his voice calm, echoing through the silent booking room. "Yes, sir." "Agent Thorne, I cannot apologize enough. This is a misunderstanding. Officer Vance is new. He's dangerous," Thorne corrected him. "He is a liability, and he just committed a felony kidnapping of a federal officer." Thorne turned his gaze back to Vance. The young officer looked like he was going to vomit. He was backing away, his hand searching for a support that wasn't there. "I told you," Thorne said, softly. "I told you to make the call. I told you to verify. But you knew better. Sir, Vance started, tears actually welling in his eyes now. "I thought you were lying. You fit the description of what." Thorne stepped closer. "A black man in a nice car." "Is that the description?" Officer Vance had no answer. "I need a phone," Thorne said to Miller. "I need to call my special agent in charge, and then I need to call the United States Attorney. And you, Lieutenant, need to call your chief, because by the time the sun sets tonight, this department is going to be national news." Miller nodded, pale and sweating. "Yes, sir. Phone is right here." Thorne picked up the receiver. He dialed a number from memory. He waited 2 rings. "Elena, it's Marcus. I'm not going to make the briefing. No, I'm at the 4th precinct. I've been arrested. Yes. You might want to bring the team down here. And bring the press liaison. We have a situation." He hung up the phone. He looked at Vance, who was now sitting on a bench, head in his hands. "Start writing your report, son," Thorne said. "Make sure you spell my name right." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By 4:00 p.m., the body cam footage had been pulled by the chief of police, who had arrived at the station looking like he had aged 10 years in an hour. But it was too late to contain the bystander video. The woman at the gas pump had uploaded her video to TikTok. It had 2 million views before Thorne even left the precinct. The title was simple: "Cop Arrests Black DEA Boss at Gas Station." The video showed everything: the calm demeanor of Thorne, the aggressive screaming of Vance, the refusal to check the badge, the twisting of the arm, the handcuffs. CNN picked it up at 5:00 p.m. Fox News had it by 5:30. By the time the evening news aired, Kyle Vance's face was on every screen in America. The Internal Affairs investigation was launched immediately, but it was a formality. The evidence was irrefutable. They found the prior complaints that had been buried. They found the pattern of stops involving minority drivers where no citations were issued, but searches were conducted without consent. They found the text messages on Vance's personal phone where he bragged to friends about putting people in their place. But the real damage came from the lawsuit. Marcus Thorne didn't just sue for himself, he hired the best civil rights firm in the state. They filed a federal lawsuit naming Kyle Vance the chief of police in the city of Atlanta. They alleged unlawful arrest, excessive force violation of the 4th Amendment, and failure to train. They didn't ask for a settlement. They asked for a jury trial. The city attorneys took one look at the video, one look at Thorne's impeccable service record, and one look at Vance's personnel file, and they panicked. They knew a jury would destroy them. They knew that if this went to trial, the discovery phase would uncover every skeleton in the department's closet. They offered $3 million. Thorne's lawyers laughed. They offered $5 million. Thorne declined. The final settlement was agreed upon 6 months later, $6.5 million. It was one of the largest payouts for a single wrongful arrest in the state's history. As for Kyle Vance, the police union didn't even try to save him. The Fraternal Order of Police issued a statement saying his actions did not reflect the values of law enforcement. He was fired 2 weeks after the incident. He was also charged criminally by the district attorney with assault and violation of oath of office. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge to avoid jail time, but his name was added to the national decertification list. He would never hold a badge again. He was working at a landscaping company mowing lawns in the same heat he used to patrol in. 6 months after the incident, Marcus Thorne sat on the front porch of his home. It was evening, the air finally cooling down. He held a glass of iced tea in his hand, watching the fireflies dance in the yard. He had retired from the DEA the week before. The settlement money meant he didn't need the pension, but he took it anyway. He had donated $2 million of the settlement to a legal defense fund for indigent defendants, people who didn't have a gold badge to save them when the handcuffs went on. He thought about that day at the gas pump often. He thought about how easily it could have gone differently. If he had been a younger man, a more fearful man, he might have flinched. He might have pulled away. And Vance, with his hand on his gun and his heart full of bias, might have pulled the trigger. It wouldn't have mattered then that he was a federal agent. He would have just been another body on the pavement. Thorne took a sip of his tea. The silence of the evening was heavy, filled with the weight of unanswered questions. He had won, yes. He was alive. He was wealthy. The bad cop was gone. But how many Kyles were still out there? How many Marcuses were sitting in cells right now because they didn't have the rank to make the lieutenant stop and listen? The system had worked for him, but only because he was part of the system. That wasn't justice. That was professional courtesy. Justice would be a world where he could pump his gas without having to prove he had a right to exist. He set the glass down. He looked at the camera breaking the fourth wall, his eyes tired but kind. "We tell these stories not to make you hate the police," he said softly. "We tell them because we need the police to be better. We need them to see the person, not the prejudice. Because if a badge and 28 years of service can't protect me from being profiled, what protects your son? What protects your father?" He leaned back in the rocking chair. Think about that next time you see a video like this. Don't scroll past. Watch it. Bear witness. Because the only thing necessary for the triumph of this kind of evil is for good people to look away. What do you think? Should officers be required to carry personal liability insurance so the taxpayers aren't footing the bill for their mistakes? And have you ever been in a situation where you felt judged before you even spoke a word? Leave a comment below. I read them all. And if you believe that truth is the first step toward change, hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more work to do.